Alright, attempt 1 at trying to explain how to put these pants together, because I have a feeling by the time we get around to the next set, we might have forgotten a few things that are important. So, this is for past patterns, small fall straight trousers with frog pockets. I can't imagine, should we be using a different pattern for any reason, it's really going to be that much different. So, these pants, moving over to this pair for Mike, because they're the ones that are the most done. And going to use these as an example. All the pairs of pants we've made so far are most of the way to the first fitting stage, so unfortunately I do not have any small pieces to show you every little step, but here goes nothing. So, first things first, the pieces. You have front, back. Some of this, not steps, pattern pieces have names that make, I mean, they may make sense to someone who's made more historic clothing than I have. I'm still somewhat new at that. So we've got the front part here, including the fall front. We're going to take this out real quick. Please tell me they didn't skip doing the hand sewing. Oh my gosh, they skipped doing the hand sewing. Well, I know what I'll be doing today. Anyway, moving past that. So these are called bearers, these front parts here. It's a weird name. Like I said, I don't know if it would have a normal name otherwise, or if this is a normal name. That's the bearer. It's an important step. So let's just start. There's the cutting instructions. That part's pretty self-explanatory. One thing I want to state clearly up front is if you have one-sided fabric, it should be pretty easy like any other print fabric. If you have fabric that is almost one-sided, so for example, this cotton twill, which is twill outside, obviously not on the inside, so it's kind of hard to catch. And if you have fabric that is exactly the same on both sides, I know it doesn't look it because I just sewed two different sides. This is the exact same on both sides, so is this linen. Make sure when you're cutting out these small pieces and sewing them together that you have one of each side. I have had, while assembling these, to take apart almost every single pair of small pieces for one pair of pants or another because they were both sewn left or both sewn right. So to save yourself the hassle, when you are sewing them together, even before that, when you're pinning them together, make sure that they are pinned one of each direction. This goes for the bearers, this goes for the front lining piece here that attaches to this part, which name is, nope, Anyway, this piece here though, the front fall part that covers the front, make sure for all these small pieces and the waistband, because I had to take a waistband out, that everything is pinned so you have a right and a left, because you'll save yourself hassle of having to seam rip it later. So the first thing you do in this pattern that it recommends is sewing all of the small pieces together. This is that front fall part, the bearers, the waistbands, and the pockets. This is not necessary. You can sew the small pieces together later as you get to putting them in, but it is like they recommend it for a reason. It's just so much easier to sew and press all the small pieces. As like it says right here, pin, sew, and clip, press, do it all now. It'll make it easier later. But again, before you clip anything, make sure you have a right and a left, not two rights or lefts, because especially since we're using a lot of fabrics that are linens or wovens that look exactly the same on both sides, it's really easy to get two lefts. So it's pretty simple. The bearers you sew together along the outside and flip. They go there. These aren't quite done right. Anyway, I know what I'll be doing at work today. So sew all the small pieces together. The front bearers, the front, not the outside, the lining piece. So it's this skinny piece here and this lining of the inside flap. And that is the front fall lining. Now, here comes the important part where we started getting things backwards as we processed how to put these together, because it had been a long time or never for a lot of us to make these. And I found I had to read through the pattern like 3 times and look at pants, not these ones, but look at other pairs of pants we already had made years and years ago that were made with the same pattern to get an idea of what the heck was going on. So, important notes. The first thing you do is you sew this lining and the bearers down to the front of the pants. Now, this part is where things got messed up a couple times. I had to take a couple out and put them back on because someone had left them and was going to pick them back up later and had put them on backwards, and I went to pick them up. So, ignore the waistband. So what you do, so you have the front of the pants, and our pattern had a line that was the cutting line where you cut between the bearer and the fall front lining. When you sew the bearer on, it seems odd, but make sure it is pointing away from the crotch seam. It should be pointing towards the flat side of your pants. This is because when you sew it, you want the seam to be hidden. And if you sew it towards the right side, when you flip it around, it'll be facing outward, or the seam will be visible. So, seams backwards, but sew the lining to the outside, or to the inside. See, I'm even confusing myself. The lining to the inside and the bearer to the outside, as in facing directions, but sew them both to the outside of the pants leg. But it should be facing like that. It should be fashion fabric on fashion fabric if you have a contrasting lining, which we did for all of these pretty much, just to make it easier to see them and know which side was the wrong side and the lining pieces when we were putting them together. So that's the first one. Then when you're done with the sewing, another thing with the sewing, because I thought you could do it in separate steps, of course, me not paying attention to the pattern, is you sew down here. It's underneath the lining, so we fold the lining back under for hand stitching up. You sew down, and it shows it here. You sew down, over, and up. Don't sew all the way down, cut it, pin the other side, and then sew all the way down and over, because you'll just have to seam rip this little bottom piece, because otherwise the bottom ends won't tuck in like that for you to do the hand sewing later to push it down. Also, some of these pants have a few steps in the wrong order, because that's what you get when you have everyone working on them who doesn't quite know what they're doing. I love everyone who's worked on them. They've been as helpful as they can be, but again, since none of us had really done this before, there were live and learns for all of us, but just notes for the future. When it says to do something, do it. And when it says to do it in a certain order, it's for a reason. I had a pair of pants where someone's like, oh, we're just going to go ahead and tack this part down because we want it to look nice now, except it was before we had sewn this stuff down. And so I just had to take it out again because it was covering up pieces I had to fold under and sew in. So the instructions are in a particular order for a reason. We'll just leave it at that. Anyway, so you sew those down, then you cut between them. So again, if this were just a flat pants leg front, because that's all you have is 2 fronts, the bearers and the linings, you cut through the middle after you stitch it down, and then you flip it the right direction. Then when you flip it the right direction, as in so the seams are tucked around now, that is when you do this hand sewing part. Whoever did this, again, love them dearly, but wrong order. Every step is in the order it is for a reason. So the next step after you sew them down is to do the hand stitching on the back. Flip to the next page here. Hand stitching on the back of the pants to make that all look nice. Yes, technically you can do this by machine. It's crossed out for a reason. It's really less of a pain and a headache to do it by hand. Then after that, the next step is the fall lining and the fall front. So you sew the 2 front pieces together at the crotch. Pretty simple there. It recommends pinning extra pieces out of the way while you're sewing, just like to keep them from getting tangled and sewn on top and have to be taken out, understandably. Anyway, so then once you in the front crotch together, this piece, you then do the same thing on the inside. So this will be the other way around. It's pinned in place. So let's move that. Kind of hate on doing this, but once you sew the crotch together, you sew the inside of the lining together. As you can see there, sew the inside of the lining together. Then you sandwich it all together, sew it flat across the top, setting it down for a moment. Sorry for the dark screen. You sew the top together and you turn it out, and it should look something like that. Pretty simple. Now, here's where it diverges. We have two sets of pattern instructions here. One for frog pockets, the ones that stick out a little, and one for inseam pockets, like that. There's no wrong way to make your pockets as far as which one is more historically accurate. They're both fine. The inseam one is just easier. I did the frog pockets for 5 or 6 of the pairs we made this year. And it's just a little more fiddly. It's not harder per se, it's just a little more fiddly. It's really not that much more difficult, but if you've never done it before, I just recommend doing inseam. They're just easier. So pockets and side seams for the frog pockets. I'm just going to show the instructions here because it is a little confusing. But in the end, it's really not too difficult. You sew the pocket, and if you've ever sewn pockets before into pants, it's not any different. You sew up the side, you sew down and around the bottom. Now, for the inseam ones, that's it. You sew it up, in and around the outside. They fold together, and then when you sew the waistband on, they're just in there. The frog pockets, what you do is there's a little bit of a different finishing technique for the inside to make sure that the top corner is a closed seam, because if you just do the inseam pockets, it doesn't have you close that top seam there. But just the inseam pocket, just leave it at that, make it easier. And then the next step is the waistband. These are obviously guys' trousers, so they're made much more easy to adjust than women's trousers. And none of ours are quite finished because we're making them for each specific person. You may notice as I flip back and forth, this says Mike. These are Mike's trousers. So each one of them is only sewn halfway up the back seam. They're falling off the table. Only sewn halfway up the back seam, so that way we can go to a fitting for them. But it's pretty simple. You attach the waistband, match the front. Again, make sure you have a right and a left. I had to take out the waistband for, can't remember who now, but one of the pairs of pants over there, I had to take the waistband out because someone had made 2 rights. Whoops. Pretty simple though. Just attach it to the waistband. But then up the back seam, not too difficult. Again, these are only halfway done up, so we can do our fittings on all our guys. Then the inseam, and you're ready for all the fiddly end bits. This is the point, once all that is done, where you do the top stitching here around the ends, because this covers up the ugly seam. If you're like, oh no, I have an ugly seam, why? It's because when you fold this over and fold this up and pin this in place and stitch it down, it all looks really nice. Ta-da! But again, it's at the end under finishing for a reason, because, yes, for a reason. We'll just leave it at that. So you do that, and then you sew down this front part. Again, it's pretty simple. You just iron it down, and then you sew under the waistband once all the fitting's done and that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's really not that difficult. And then it's just all the buttons. There's so many buttons. It's a good thing I like making buttons and buttonholes. Let's just put it that way, because there are 11 buttons if I remember correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, because we don't use clip-on suspenders. We use button braces. So there are 6 for the braces, 3 down the front, and then 2 on the front of the frog. So that's what all these markings here are for. These pink markings is 1, 2, 3 there, 2 there, 1, 2, and then I don't think the suspender buttons are marked yet. But yeah, there you go. That's the brief rundown of how you make basic fall front trousers. And these are period all the way up through like the 40s from the like 1700s. So it's worked for a lot of things. I'm not good at ending videos, so bye.